Is endgame in sight for the Assad regime, with the U.S. and regional allies seeking to subvert diplomacy and the warning from Damascus it will use chemical weapons if faced with foreign intervention? It would appear the Syrian civil war is at a tipping point. To crosstalk Syria's possible endgame, I'm joined by Sharro in London. He's a Middle East blogger. In Chicago, we have Stephen Lenman. He is a blogger and author. And in Los Angeles, we cross to Majid Rafizadeh. He is a policy analyst and an ambassador for the National Iranian American Council. All right, gentlemen, crosstalk rules in effect. That means you can jump in anytime you want. Carl, let me go to you first. Where do we go from here? Damascus says it has chemical weapons, and the U.S. and its regional allies have no interest in diplomacy anymore. Where do we go?
I think let's clarify one thing. All this talk about tipping point and an end game, I think, is very exaggerated.
Okay.
It all started with the explosion last week that killed several of a former and a current defense minister and security leaders. And that was basically a very high-quality operation. That was really a dramatic operation. But in terms of the real dynamics on the ground in Syria, they're not going to shift very much. And in fact, what we have seen, this is sort of given an impetus to the Syrian regime to try to retake Damascus. So I predict that this balance of kind of ebb and flow of the Syrian uprising will continue. There is no substantive kind of qualitative or quantitative change in the balance of power, but it seems that there's sort of this imagined momentum and a reawakened interest of the West now that the chemical weapons are mentioned is sort of might propel this external dynamic to change, which we need to focus on, because it's not directly linked to what's happening on the ground in Syria. I mean, it's been going on for 16 months. Why all of a sudden now the talk of chemical weapons becomes such a priority and securing them? This is the interesting angle we need to look at.
Okay, Carl, if I can just stay with you, you're saying the Lebanese situation, the 15-year civil war.
Not necessarily that long, but I think...
No, not in length, but in the type of conflict.
Yeah. In terms of the type of conflict, unfortunately, and I have to clarify, I'm with the aspirations for freedom of the Syrian people. But what I have warned against from the beginning is if there's no clear political leadership with a clear political message, ultimately, another dynamic will take over, which is the sectarian dynamic. And I've long said sort of this is not deterministic. This is not bound to happen. It's not fatalistic. But where is the politics? Why are people reluctant to join up from other communities in Syria with this uprising? And that political failure means that the sectarian dynamic will get enhanced, unfortunately.
It's very interesting. Majid, if I go to you in Los Angeles, it's a very interesting thing we just heard from Carl. I mean, is there a political agenda that can coalesce the people in Syria?
Well, I think we can say that the month of July was a turning point since the uprising started 16 months ago. You see the more improved performance and coordination by capabilities by the local opposition groups and the rebels in Syria. I think they're trying to concentrate on Damascus and Aleppo to send a message to the Syrian people, to coalesce the Syrian people that the regime is more vulnerable than it projects, and the regime cannot hold the stability. As you know, the Syrian regime, they have been citing the calmness in Damascus repeatedly to strengthen their argument that they enjoy support in Syria. But I think it's very hard for them to sustain that argument. And you see now a tactical shift in the strategies that the rebels are using in order to as you mentioned, to coalesce the Syrian people and to convince the silent middle class, especially in Damascus and Aleppo, to join them.
Do you think the different sectarian communities can get along? Because this radical Sunnis coming out of Saudi Arabia, we've seen this before, haven't we? Afghanistan?
Well, I think you're right. I mean, if different players try to take side with different parties in Syria and to try to secure their own national interests, you might see what you mentioned. It's like the civil war in Lebanon or Iraq or Afghanistan. But I think probably you also would see, as the violence increase in Syria, as more people being killed, probably you would see different.
Stephen, if I can go to you,
Syrian people might come together.
If I can go to you, I mean, the outside forces that are involved in this civil war, and they're numerous here. Are they all on the same page, or are we just looking at maybe a Spanish civil war? We've already talked about Lebanon. How about Spain in the 1930s?
Well, Peter, let me say categorically, what's going on in Syria, I've written volumes on what's going on. There are times I write every single day on what's going on. This morning, before I came to the studio, I drafted a new article for tomorrow, and my title is Syria Threatens No One. Syria is a non-belligerent country. What's going on is not an uprising. It's not a revolution. It's not a civil war. The ICRC was paid $8 million by Washington to lie, as if their lie changed international law. International law did not change, and it's very clear and categorical. It says no nation may interfere in the internal affairs of another except in self-defense. Syria attacked no one. Syria threatens no one, doesn't threaten its neighbors, doesn't threaten Israel, doesn't threaten the West. What's going on in Syria since winter 2011 is Western generated violence for one purpose. Washington planned this years ago. General Wesley Clark, former NATO commander, wrote about it in his book, Winning Modern Wars. He visited the Pentagon right around the 9/11 period, and he was told by high officials in the Pentagon that Washington planned regime change in about half a dozen regional countries. Afghanistan, of course, Iraq, Libya, Syria.
Okay,
Iran,
Stephen, let me go to Carl in
Sudan.
London here. Stephen just mentioned all those countries. Has it ever worked out very well?
Can I just say something, though? I mean, I think Stephen is sort of getting himself a bit muddled and a bit confused. And we're seeing that amongst a lot of Western anti-imperialists, is this desire to oppose Western intervention is kind of pushing them in the direction of kind of distorting, if you like, what's happening on the ground, or a distorted understanding of what's happening in the ground. I think also the other problem is this appearance that the US has any clear sense of purpose or clarity in the Middle East has been completely shattered. And that's even more destructive, because the United States now in the Middle East, because it doesn't have a clear sense of purpose, is just very detrimental to stability. And this is what we need to focus on. So unfortunately, I mean, far from the US having a clear plan about how they direct the course of events, it's sort of persisting in this sustained level of meddling that has no sense of purpose and allowing its allies to do all sorts of things. But it doesn't have a clear idea, which is more devastating. That is likely to push all these conflicts around the Middle East into kind of a further kind of sustained periods of time, because the US simply it doesn't seem to be clear about how it establishes stability, how it establishes order, how even it protects its commercial interests.
Why should it be in the position to do that, Carl?
Well, this is kind of a historical analogy, because I think we have to shift in our understanding of kind of imperialism. It was clearer in the past, and actually it made our job easier because it was clearer. It was clearer for us to oppose it. Now, there's a level of incompetence and lack of foresight in Washington that's actually reflecting very badly on the situation on the ground. So you talk about how they exited from Iraq, leaving the country in a complete shambles and not taking responsibility for what they did before, and inviting Iran and Syria to come into Iraq and allow the new cabinet to be formed and all that kind of thing, only for them a year later to sort of turn against Syria, and suddenly it becomes the pariah state. So there's no sense of consistency, and this is what we need to pay attention to.
I think a lot of people think it is consistent. Let's go to Los Angeles. Majid, you wanted to jump in there. Go ahead.
Yeah, if I can just add to what your guest said earlier, that Syria is not a danger to anybody and it's not a revolution. I just want to say some facts that this started with a localized movement in Daraa with some children first writing graffiti on wall and then being tortured, and then when their family went to police station, they told them that go and make new children.